On Monday morning, September 19, 1977, thousands of men in the Mahoning Valley went to work expecting another shift inside the steel empire that had fed their families for generations. By the end of that day, many of them understood that the world they had trusted was gone. Youngstown Sheet and Tube announced it was closing the Campbell Works. Around 5,000 workers were losing their jobs. Not slowly, not after years of warning, not as part of some gentle transition into the future. Just a decision made far away, delivered to a city that had built its entire life around fire, iron, and paychecks. They called it Black Monday. But Black Monday did not kill Youngstown by itself. It was only the moment the wound became visible. Within the next few years, the collapse spread through the Mahoning Valley like a furnace going cold. U.S. Steel closed. Republic Steel cut back. Sheet and Tube disappeared from the city that had carried its name. By the early 1980s, roughly 50,000 jobs were gone from the valley. Not only steel workers, but truck drivers, shop owners, mechanics, bartenders, teachers, barbers, and families, whose lives were tied to the weekly rhythm of the mills. But here is the part that makes Youngstown different. Before steel killed it, the city had already been wounded by something darker. For years, America knew Youngstown by another name, Crimetown USA. A city of blast furnaces and union halls, yes, but also a city of car bombs, rackets, political rot, and underworld power. This is the story of a city that was killed twice, once from the inside, by corruption that ate into the civic bones, and once from the outside, when the steel empire decided Youngstown was no longer worth saving. To understand the fall, you have to understand the machine. Youngstown did not become powerful by accident. It sat in the Mahoning Valley of northeastern Ohio, between Pittsburgh and Cleveland, on a corridor of coal, iron, railroads, immigrant labor, and industrial hunger. In the 19th century, local raw materials for iron smelting helped start the boom. By the 20th century, Youngstown had become one of America's great steel centers. The Mahoning River ran through a valley lined with furnaces, mills, rail yards, slag heaps, and smokestacks. Youngstown, Sheet, and Tube, U.S. Steel, Republic Steel. These were not just company names. They were the architecture of daily life. The steel made here went into buildings, bridges, factories, machines, weapons, and the infrastructure of a country that was still teaching itself how big it could become. During the first half of the 20th century, Youngstown looked like a city with a permanent job. Its population peaked at just over 170,000. Downtown had tall buildings, theaters, hotels, banks, department stores, and the confidence of a place that believed the furnaces would never go cold. Immigrants from Southern Europe, Eastern Europe, the Mediterranean, and the American South came to work in the mills and build neighborhoods around churches, clubs, taverns, schools, and ethnic festivals. A steelworker did not need a college degree to buy a house, raise children, keep food on the table, and retire with dignity. The work was dangerous, hot, and punishing. Men breathed dust, carried scars, and lived by shift changes. But the bargain was clear. Give your body to the mill, and the mill would give your family a place in America. That was the machine. Steel made wages. Wages made neighborhoods. Neighborhoods made schools, churches, tax revenue, city services, and civic pride. Youngstown was not simply producing steel. It was producing the working-class version of the American dream. But inside that dream, another city was growing. The same money that made the mills roar also fed illegal gambling, protection rackets, mob wars, political favors, and a culture where too many people learned to survive by looking away. In the late 1950s and early 1960s, Youngstown became nationally associated with underworld violence. Car bombings were so common in the lore of the city that a car bomb assassination became known as a Youngstown tune-up. In 1963, the Saturday Evening Post branded the city Crimetown USA. The nickname was ugly, but it stuck because the violence was real. The most infamous moment came in 1962, when racketeer Charles Cadillac Charlie Cavallero and his 11-year-old son Tommy were killed by a car bomb on the city's north side. Another child was badly injured. The bombing shocked the community because it crossed a line even people accustomed to mob violence could recognize. It was not just one racketeer killing another anymore. A child had been killed in a family car. That was Youngstown's first death, not the sudden one, the slow one. A city can keep working while corruption spreads. The mills can still run. The paychecks can still clear. The churches can still fill on Sunday. The newspapers can still print headlines about growth and prosperity. But underneath, trust begins to rot. Politics becomes transactional. Law enforcement becomes suspect. Business becomes tangled with favors. The city learns to accept a little more decay each year because the furnaces are still burning and the paychecks still arrive. That was the hidden flaw. Youngstown had two dependencies. It depended on steel for its economy, and it depended on pretending that corruption was survivable as long as steel kept paying the bills. For a while, both things seemed true. Then the second death came on a Monday morning. By the 1970s, the American steel industry was under pressure from every direction. Older integrated mills like the ones in Youngstown required enormous labor forces, massive maintenance, and constant capital investment. Newer mini-mills were more flexible. Foreign competition grew stronger. Corporate ownership changed. Decisions that once might have been made by people with local stakes were increasingly made by distant executives, conglomerates, financiers, and boards, looking at spreadsheets instead of neighborhoods. Youngstown's steel machine had been built for a world in which American heavy industry looked untouchable. By 1977, that world was cracking. On September 19, Youngstown Sheet and Tube announced the shutdown of Campbell Works. For the men inside those mills, it was not just a layoff. It was the collapse of a promise. The company had been woven into the city for generations. Families had arranged their lives around its shifts. Houses had been bought because of its wages. Children had been sent to school because of its pensions. Churches, clubs, diners, and corner stores lived off its paychecks. Then, almost overnight, 5,000 jobs were gone. The cruelty of Black Monday was not only the number, it was the speed. A city built over decades can be wounded in a single announcement, and once the first furnace went cold, others followed. Sheet and Tube's other operations faded. U.S. Steel closed its Ohio works. Republic Steel declined. Steel-related suppliers, small businesses, and entire neighborhoods lost the economic gravity that had held them together. People sometimes call this a ripple effect. In Youngstown, ripple is too gentle a word. This was a tidal wave through a valley built on one industry, and Youngstown had very little to catch the fall. It did not have a massive university medical empire waiting to replace steel. It did not have a state capital economy. It did not have a diversified corporate base strong enough to absorb the shock. When steel left, it took not only jobs, but the operating system of the city. Tax revenue shrank. Houses emptied. Schools struggled. Streets designed for a city of 170,000 people were left serving a city that would eventually have around 60,000. The built environment became too large for the population left inside it. Blocks that once held steelworker families became stretches of vacant lots and abandoned houses. The city did not just decline. It had to physically shrink into the space left behind. That is why Youngstown became one of the most important examples of America's shrinking city era. In the 2000s, the Youngstown 2010 plan did something most American cities were still afraid to say out loud. It accepted that Youngstown was a smaller city and would not simply grow back to its old size. That idea sounds obvious now. At the time, it was almost radical. American cities are supposed to promise growth, bigger population, bigger tax base, bigger future. Youngstown had to admit something colder. The old city was not coming back. So it began to rethink land use, demolish houses that could not be saved, turn gray into green, and plan for a future smaller than its past. That is not surrender. It is triage. It is what happens when a city looks at its own ruins and stops pretending the wound is temporary. But shrinking a city is not the same as healing it. The corruption did not vanish with the mills. In the 1990s and 2000s, Youngstown and the Mahoning Valley again became associated with political scandal and organized crime investigations. The most famous figure was James Traficant, the congressman from the area who had built a career as a theatrical populist, a local hero to some, and a symbol of the valley's tolerance for corruption to others. In 2002, he was convicted of bribery, racketeering, tax evasion, and obstruction of justice. That conviction did not create Youngstown's reputation. It confirmed how long the old shadow had lasted. And that is the cruel pattern of Youngstown. When there was steel, corruption could hide behind prosperity. When steel disappeared, corruption became one more weight on a city already trying to breathe underwater. Bruce Springsteen later wrote a song called Youngstown, turning the city into a symbol of workers who helped build America's wars, industries, and wealth, only to be discarded when the numbers changed. That is why Youngstown still hurts. It did not fail because its people refused to work. It failed after generations of people worked too hard for a system that did not owe them loyalty. They gave the mills their bodies. They gave the country its steel. They helped build tanks, bridges, factories, and cities. And when the industry moved on, there was no equivalent promise waiting on the other side. Today, Youngstown is still alive. Around 60,000 people live there. It has a university, parks, cultural institutions, new downtown efforts, additive manufacturing research, and people trying to build something after steel. Calling it dead would erase the people who stayed. But calling it recovered would erase what was lost. The skyline still carries the outline of a larger city. The neighborhoods still show the missing teeth of demolition. The past is not gone. It is visible in the empty land where houses used to stand, in the old industrial corridors, in the memory of families who can still tell you exactly where they were on Black Monday. Every city in this series declines in its own way. Flint was poisoned after the auto empire left. Birmingham survived by becoming something different. Ghost towns die when the ore runs out. Youngstown suffered a rarer fate. It was strong enough to keep going while corruption ate at it from within, but not strong enough to survive the day the industry that paid for everything walked away. That is the lesson. A city can survive one kind of decay. It can survive bad politics for a while if the economy is strong. It can survive economic shock for a while if its institutions are clean and adaptable. But when a city depends on one industry, and that city's institutions are already compromised, collapse does not arrive as a surprise. It arrives as an appointment. Black Monday was not just a plant closing. It was the day Youngstown discovered that the empire it had served did not belong to it. The mills had been local in their suffering, but corporate in their loyalty. The workers lived in Youngstown. The families prayed in Youngstown. The children went to school in Youngstown. But the decision to end their world could be made somewhere else. That is how empires end. Not always with invasion, not always with fire. Sometimes they end in a conference room, with a vote, a memo, a press release, and 5,000 men walking out of a mill for the last time. The frightening question is not why Youngstown collapsed. The frightening question is how many places today are built on the same bargain: one dominant industry, one fragile tax base, one culture of looking away, and one Monday morning waiting somewhere on the calendar. If you want to follow the places where glory goes to die, subscribe. Next week, a city that built an empire on casinos, then went broke when the luck ran out.